Hello, I'm Michelle DeHaven from the Wichita State University Environmental Finance Center. The Environmental Protection Agency divided the country into 10 regions, and each region houses an environmental finance center that serves to deliver targeted technical assistance to and partner with states, tribes, local governments, and private and nonprofit sectors to provide innovative solutions to help manage the costs of environmental financing and program management. The Wichita State University EFC is the Environmental Finance Center for EPA Region 7, which includes Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, and Iowa. Although our primary focus is on this region, we provide technical assistance, training, and research on projects across the nation. Because of our network with the other EFCs, we were included in an EPA-funded project led by the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Environmental Finance Center to examine customer affordability for municipal water and wastewater services. This project sought to use specific metrics to assess customer affordability of water services in small to mid-sized communities across the country. This study used the methodology outlined in 2 national memos, an EPA memo on the Financial Capability Assessment Framework for Municipal Clean Water Act requirements, and developing a new framework for household affordability and financial capability assessment in the water sector, which was developed in 2019. These memos informed the calculations used in this study to determine if the affordability metrics were appropriate for determining customer affordability for water and wastewater services. The participating EFCs completed a variety of calculations with up to 20 communities across the country to assess appropriate measurements that can be used for affordability determinations. Each participating community was interviewed twice. First, to gather information about the community, such as water bills, billing cycles, source water, types of facilities, etc. The second interview was conducted after the calculations were completed. The purpose of this interview was to help the community understand the calculations and ask them for feedback and thoughts about the results and usefulness of the calculations. A case study was written for each community that included key calculation measures and interview narratives to create a story of the community from the qualitative and quantitative position. The evaluations from the EFCs in the communities consider how the metrics apply to the communities and what may or may not be useful, including potential costs of assessing these metrics, how water rates are impacted, and what types of policy decisions are made to address affordability concerns. The inputs came from many sources. Community characteristics such as median household income, population, household size, etc. came from the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey. Other inputs were taken from online sources such as HUD, the MIT calculator for living wages, healthcare.gov, SNAP benefits amounts, state taxes, and minimum wages for the communities from the Economic Policy Institute. These resources are available to anyone and fairly accessible. However, it does take some time to find. Utility information, such as average water and wastewater bills, base charges, volumetric rates, etc., were obtained directly from the community. There was the option to use census tract or census blocked information. However, all of our participating communities were very small, and specific census tract block data was not available for the purposes of these calculations. All of these inputs were used to calculate the affordability metrics. The affordability metrics use the inputs to provide the results that can be indicative of customer affordability. These metrics are used together to get an overall picture of financial ability of a community for water and wastewater services. The metrics that you see here with a star next to them are the indicators that have benchmarks that can deliver a clearer idea of affordability. While the other metrics may not have benchmarks, they can still provide an overall picture of community financial capabilities. These benchmarks can help communities to better understand the financial capabilities of their community by understanding where their community lies within these ideals. Each environmental finance center that participated in this study was asked to complete these processes with 3 to 4 communities. The Wichita State University participating communities were Fort Scott, Kansas, Asbury, Iowa, and Marshalltown, Iowa. Fort Scott is a small municipality in eastern Kansas, about 5 miles from the Kansas-Missouri border. We interviewed the Director of Public Works and the Director of Finance for the city. Fort Scott water is sourced from surface water at a city-owned and operated plant. The service population is largely residential. 51% of Fort Scott's production goes to a rural water district. The rate structures for water and wastewater are tiered at specific volume usage on top of a monthly base rate. Overall, Fort Scott has a mid to high financial burden for the lower income residents. City staff stated that there is an awareness that the community has a higher than normal poverty levels. However, the challenge for considering affordability when setting rates is that the system requires a certain level of revenue to maintain operations. Generally, households are not considered when rate setting. To try to keep up with regulatory compliance and operational needs, the utility has incurred a 3% annual increase for all accounts since 2016. These metrics show a point in time rather than considering trends. However, this snapshot could be helpful for the community during economic development conversations. Additionally, this metric does not include some of these metrics do not include wastewater bills. The residential indicator, though revealing, was not an influence for Fort Scott when determining rates. However, it may be helpful for them in the future as they plan to apply for grants. The affordability ratio for Fort Scott could not be calculated because the calculations show that the lowest income households do not have any disposable income. By default, this is above the threshold and shows that the water sector costs may be too high for low-income households. This was not surprising to Fort Scott considering the prevalence of poverty in their community. Fort Scott speculates that this may contribute to the high delinquency rates. Asbury, Iowa is a small municipality in eastern Iowa and a suburb of Dubuque. We interviewed the city administrator. Asbury water is sourced from groundwater deep wells, and the service population is largely residential. The rate structures for water are tiered at specific volume usage, and customers are charged a monthly base rate. It was stressed that a lot of improvements and subsequent rate increases are due to the Iowa Department of Natural Resources requirements. The focus of city leadership and utility leaders is that Asbury has a viable potable water source. Asbury is an affluent community on the outskirts of a large urban area. Affordability concerns, while prevalent, are not a large priority due to the high income of the community. Asbury is in the top 10 in the state of Iowa for median household income, so it is not surprising that this metric shows a low burden when compared with other required expenses. The city administrator likes the results of these metrics and finds them useful for planning the next year's budget. These results may be useful for considering rate increases while addressing affordability questions. Due to the low burden that Asbury's water rates have, this may make a case for increased investment and subsequent rate analyses to determine if increases are needed and or feasible. This metric does show a point in time rather than considering trends. However, this snapshot could be helpful for the community during economic development conversations. Marshalltown, Iowa is a small municipality in central Iowa, approximately 50 miles northeast of Des Moines. We interviewed the city administrator and the directors of the water and wastewater divisions. Marshalltown water is sourced from groundwater deep wells. The service population is largely residential, and the rate structures for water and wastewater are tiered at meter size and connection type. Marshalltown also uses a bi-monthly billing cycle. The wastewater utility has been under a consent decree order to reduce inflow and infiltration for 10 years and is in the final stage of completing that order. Natural disasters have impacted the community over the past several years. In 2018, a tornado hit Marshalltown, leaving the community with cleanup and rebuilding priorities. Households were experiencing financial impacts from the disaster. Therefore, Marshalltown did not have the capacity to increase rates. Marshalltown is again recovering from a natural disaster. In August of 2020, a derecho swept through and left significant changes. They are currently assessing whether they have the capacity to increase rates or not. The city administrator was surprised by the higher poverty prevalence indicator, but was not surprised by the lower burden indicated by the residential indicator. It was explained that they refer to an annual rate study conducted by the city of Ames, Iowa, which is approximately 40 miles west of Marshalltown. The engineering firm that completes the rate study examines many communities throughout Iowa to show what water and wastewater rates are statewide. Marshalltown is consistently on the low end for water rates and in the middle range for wastewater. The affordability ratio shows that water sector costs for Marshalltown are above the threshold for affordability. It is speculated that the customer-side affordability management of wastewater and water rates is difficult because of the bi-monthly billing cycle. Bills may be more manageable on a monthly basis rather than 2 months at a time. Marshalltown is looking into steps to transition to a monthly billing cycle. The usefulness of these calculations for the participating communities were similar. Communities reported that these metrics are good talking points for decision makers. One community mentioned that a single-page document to show these results might be useful for the utility board and city council for them to better understand affordability concerns in the community. The benchmarks are a good reference to understand community affordability and may provide a stepping-off point to further investigation into affordability concerns. These metrics might be helpful when conducting rate studies and may provide important information between studies. Some of the concerns with these metrics revolve around the accurate depiction of the community. Some of the metrics are deceptive and do not capture the details of the community, such as Marshalltown's bi-monthly billing cycle. There were concerns over how housing costs were determined and wondered if there were more efficient methods of determining actual housing costs in their community. These metrics did not consider other expenses that residents have, such as their phones, transportation, and child care. And these processes may be irrelevant because rates and rate increases are driven by system needs. Communities are interested in affordability issues, however, meeting state and federal requirements and ensuring a properly operating system are the priorities. Addressing community affordability is a complex process. Balance is elusive when trying to maintain water and wastewater operations while being sensitive to affordability concerns. There is a frustration in communities that municipalities solely carry the responsibility for the cost of service, rather than spread amongst organizations such as farms and businesses that also contribute to sediment, contamination, etc. There are a lot of politics at play in decision-making bodies that can influence whether or not affordability and adequate funding are priorities. And the participating communities overall believe that the metrics provided can be useful for having conversations and understanding the picture of financial capabilities of the community regarding municipal water and wastewater services. Although there are some concerns with some elements of these metrics, overall these calculations can provide utilities with an instrument to aid in rate setting, affordability conversations, and future plannings. These metrics can help a community by providing increased attention to affordability concerns, helping community members and decision makers develop an understanding of processes necessary to provide clean, safe water, and by using it as a tool for rate analysis and/or rate setting. Thank you for listening today. Customer affordability is a topic that requires frequent and in-depth conversations with many different stakeholders. If you have questions or thoughts about these metrics, feel free to reach out anytime.